when we started Breaking Israel News about 4 years ago, just 4 years ago. So one of the first persons that I reached out to and asked to meet was Chris Mitchell. And Chris was always so gracious to me with his time, and I'm deeply appreciative of your guidance, of your friendship, and of your participation today. Because if there's anybody who understands prophecy in the news, like Chris literally wrote the book, Prophecy in the News, that I see he has it on the table, and hopefully he'll talk to us a little bit about. Chris is a veteran of the notion of prophecy in the news as the bureau chief, the Middle East bureau chief at CBN, and an expert, especially when it comes to Israel. Now, Chris, the question for you is, you've been here for a long time, and what was it like when you started? And what is it like now, specifically when it comes to the shift in the way that the Christian world looks at Israel and the way that Christians and Jews are now starting to work together in different kinds of ways? And can you comment on that?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's a real honor to be up here on the stage with, I've got to interview everyone on the stage except Cade, and so if you have time, maybe we can do an interview. I interviewed Tuli about the restoration of the Hebrew language. We just interviewed David a few days ago about Jerusalem and moving the U.S. Embassy. We talked to David about the Hallel, saying the Psalms together as Jews and Christians, and Arena about the city of David. And just an amazing place to be here in Israel, in Jerusalem, to be able to report on what's happening. We meaning my wife and 3 children, we came in August of 2000. Our children were 16, 11, and 8 at the time. We came August 17th. September 28th of 2000, the Intifada began, and so we lived through a sort of, somebody said we got thrown into the deep end of the pool. Thank the Lord that he was there as well, so we didn't drown. And it was just it has been an amazing opportunity to sort of report on what's happening prophetically and being on the front lines of Israel's history. To your point, Tuli, about the way Jews and Christians have cooperated in the time that I've been here, almost 17 years, I think it's been a bit of a revolution. I can remember being asked to come to a hotel room to meet with Malcolm Hoenlein, the executive director of the Conference of U.S. Presidents of Jewish Organizations. It was sort of a hush-hush meeting. It was actually former representatives of Bridges for Peace were there. Michael and Felice Friedson from the media line were there actually putting the meeting together. But I think that was sort of, to me, one of the first meetings about this cooperation. Later on, there was Yuri Stern, who helped start the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus. Since then, there's been the Christian Friends of Yad Vashem, helped organized by the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem. Christian Friends of Magen David Adom. I think David's organization is evidence of this too. Throughout this time, in the background, and actually I think one of the pioneers, it has to be the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem, founded in 1980, that has been working on Jewish-Christian relations. Bridges for Peace with Tom and Becky Brimmer. Christian Friends of Israel with Kevin and Stacy Howard, and Ray and Sharon Sanders really have pioneered many of this work. And I think this conference is an evidence too of some of the cooperation going on between Christians and Jews, and really an unprecedented way. I felt like last night's premiere of that movie called In Our Hands, The Battle for Jerusalem, was more evidence of that. It was produced by a Christian organization, CBN, and I can praise the movie because I really didn't work on the movie itself. It was extremely well done, a combination of a documentary and dramatic reenactments. And CBN invested a lot of time and effort in treasure in trying to make this 50th anniversary of the reunification of the city, the liberation of Jerusalem, a special event. Gordon Robertson shared a story I had never heard last night, but when he was 9 years old, that's when the Six-Day War began. His father, Pat Robertson, the founder of CBN, gathered him and his other siblings together and prayed for the peace of Jerusalem and told them what a prophetic event it was that Jerusalem, for the first time in more than 2,000 years, was liberated and no longer trodden under the Gentiles. So that was just a powerful thing. So I just see this trend increasing. And one of the things that I noticed during the Intifada, because after it began in September, late September of 2000, many people stopped coming. The tourist industry began to dry up, and the one group that kept coming were evangelical Christians. And I believe that Israeli leaders, Israeli people realized that this was something that they were going to be the friends of Israel. They would stand with the Jewish state during very, very difficult times. And I think as well as groups like Christians United for Israel, probably the largest pro-Israel group in the United States, is one more evidence of a growing, I think, interest in Israel and what's happening here. And I think that trend will continue. Tuli mentioned the book that I wrote. It's called Dateline Jerusalem, an eyewitness account of prophecies unfolding in the Middle East. And the very simple theme of that book is that 2,000 years ago, all roads led to Rome. 2,000 years later, all roads are leading to Jerusalem. And I think it's just an extraordinary, and I think there's an acceleration of that as well. The interview we did with David just a couple of weeks ago was about the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, and I think that is just one evidence of this increasing interest. Can you think of any other country in the world where it makes global news of whether or not the U.S. is going to move their embassy? I think this is just a unique situation. So Jerusalem holds a unique place in obviously prophecy and also the news today that we see. And I was also going to add just some of the things that I've been reporting on, and I have the privilege of reporting on not only from the news perspective, but from a biblical perspective, and that's the joy of working for CBN News. We're not afraid to be able to take the Bible and the headlines and put the two together, and it's really been a privilege to be working with CBN for that. For example, we were down at the City of David just last week. We reported on this new road that's being uncovered that tells not only this is from the time of Jesus, during the time of Pontius Pilate, but it also tells the archaeological record of the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. You can go there and you can see a burned out palm frond from 2,000 years ago, which I don't think almost seems miraculous that you could have a palm frond preserved since then. You can see the ballista, the kind of arrowheads and the weapons that were used by both the Romans and the Jewish rebels at the time. So it's just an extraordinary time to be alive. We've been immersed in the Six-Day War as we've been doing stories leading up to the premiere of In Our Hands, the Battle for Jerusalem. And I'll just mention 3 stories that we've done. One is on the restoration of the temple. We interviewed Rabbi Chaim Richman from the Temple Institute, Rabbi Yehuda Glick, minister of the Knesset, about the profound happening 50 years ago when they said the Temple Mount is in our hands. Rabbi Chaim Richman told us an interesting, fascinating story about a Jordanian guide from the Jordanian parliament who met the soldiers on the Temple Mount the very day they liberated it. And he began to show them around, and he said that this is where the sanctuary was, this is where the menorah was, this is where the Holy of Holies was. And they said, "How do you know this?" And he said, "Well, our fathers passed on this tradition, and their fathers passed on this tradition. And they said, we knew that one day the Jews would wage a war, and they would capture the Temple Mount, and they would rebuild the temple." And he said, "Are you starting tomorrow?" Well, obviously, Chaim Richman said they weren't ready. But 50 years later, it's getting closer and closer to the Jewish people or Christians being able to pray on the Temple Mount. The other thing is archaeology. We did a story with Eilat Mazar and Gabai Bar Kai, probably 2 of the most well-known archaeologists in Jerusalem, and Eilat Mazar discovered a bulla of King Hezekiah. And the way she was so excited about describing it, she says, almost like you can touch King Hezekiah. And Gabi Bar Kai discovered silver scrolls several centuries before the Dead Sea Scrolls. And you can see that the biblical record is there, as Anna Arena has so eloquently showed, there in the debris of Jerusalem, and something that UNESCO really doesn't recognize quite yet, but hopefully they will soon. And finally, we were out in Shiloh. We were out in Shiloh and interviewed David Rubin, the former mayor of Shiloh. And we were in a playground, and you could see boys and girls laughing and playing soccer. And I said, "Is this prophecy?" And he said, "This is prophecy come alive." You see the sounds of children, not only in the streets of Jerusalem, but in Judea and Samaria. And it's just an extraordinary sense to see this come alive before our very eyes.
Thank you, Chris.